My name is George Markowski. I've been working with the Heracles project for several years, and I want to do an introduction to environmental entrepreneurship for anybody who's interested in this area, and in particular, anybody who wishes to commercialize some of the ideas that have been developed during the Heracles project. Okay, the course objective is to introduce some of the foundational knowledge necessary to start an enterprise. It helps you think through some basic questions to help you decide whether or not you want to start an enterprise and what sort of enterprise you want to start. It will also point you to resources that will help you get started creating an enterprise. And you will, of course, need to do a lot more reading and studying and consulting with experienced people to help you create your enterprise. It is important that you put as much thought as you can before you really start it, because it's much easier to modify plans before you start implementing them. And this could save you a lot of grief. So here's an outline of the course. First, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship in general. Then I would like to introduce some basic questions that I think will help you get your thoughts organized about entrepreneurship. And these basic questions are sometimes called the 5 W's and an H. And the 5 W's are why, what, who, when, where, and finally how. And if you think about these questions, this will help you. And then once we discuss these questions in more details, we'll talk about some of the next steps that you can take, which will also help you refine these questions. So entrepreneurship, if you look up a definition, and you would find similar definitions in other places. This comes from dictionary.com. And it says an entrepreneur is a person who organizes and manages any enterprise, especially a business, usually with considerable initiative and risk. Now, I've bold-faced those words, considerable initiative and risk. Starting an enterprise is definitely challenging. It's going to take a lot of time and will probably cost a fair amount of money. You do hope that you will be rewarded and you will make back all your money, but there, of course, are no guarantees. So it is important for you to, understand that this is going to take a fair amount of effort and that there's risk involved. An entrepreneur is also an employer of productive labor and a contractor. This brings up an important point. Oftentimes when people start enterprises, they find that in some sense, their employees might be better off than they are, because one of the things you must do in an enterprise is pay your employees or they will leave. You are assuming a lot of burden in the hope of eventual reward, but oftentimes in the early stages, you're the least paid person in the enterprise. So when people read the stories of famous entrepreneurs, they always read about people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, who made these colossal companies and reap huge rewards and become, among the richest people in the world. But one needs to remember that most entrepreneurial efforts fail, often at great cost to the entrepreneur. And what this course is about helping you get started in a way that minimizes the risk of failure. But we cannot guarantee that you won't fail. There are just too many unknowns, and you have to go into this understanding that failure is a possibility. So our goal is to help you make intelligent decisions and reduce the risk as much as possible. But as I've said several times now, there's a non-trivial possibility of economic loss, and you need to be aware of that. Also, since many people reading this presentation come from academia, from some other large organization, we'll point out some of the key differences between being an entrepreneur and being an employee of a large organization. So you have to often change your views on things when you go from being an employee in a large organization where lots of things are taken care of for you to being an entrepreneur where you are the person who needs to take care of lots of things for other people. So that's a considerable change, and it's important that you understand some of the differences. There's a Wikipedia article on entrepreneurship that gives a good overview of the subject, and I'm going to include it as an appendix to the guidebook for this course to make it more convenient for you to access. The term environmental entrepreneurship suggests that you want to start up an enterprise connected with environmental questions. It turns out, however, that the core questions and practices that we're going to talk about cut across all enterprises. There are some specific issues when dealing with environmental issues having to do with particular liability issues or ethical issues, or depending on the type of cultural heritage you're dealing with, there may even be religious issues. But all of those things need to be worked on in very specific contexts, in addition to the general entrepreneurial questions. It's impossible within this single presentation to cover all the kinds of questions that could come up. So we're going to focus on the general entrepreneurial questions, but point out to you that you are going to have to deal with the specific questions in the particular domain that you're going to be working. Now, this is the last of the Heracles virtual courses. There are 12 other courses that focus on various aspects of the Heracles project, and we hope that those will be a source of inspiration to people as they look for ideas to commercialize. And so we hope that other courses will actually provide ideas. Now, you can, of course, in listening to those courses, be inspired to produce your own ideas. I should mention that you see this little insert that has a picture of me speaking. When you're actually viewing the video, you could, in many cases, if that picture is blocking your view of something on the slides, you can actually move the picture. So if you search on the internet for starting a business, there is no shortage of material. There's a bewildering collection of checklists, articles, opinions, guides of all sorts. And the material can be very useful once you answer some basic questions and acquire a direction for your enterprise. But it could be a little just confusing when you start out because you don't know where to begin. So my goal for this presentation is to help you get started, to point you in some direction, so that then you can then acquire the knowledge and skills that you actually need for your particular enterprise. You should expect to put in quite a bit more time than is required just to view this course. So creating an enterprise is a deeply personal activity. You have to find a method that works for your personality and that's consistent with your philosophical beliefs and your core organizing principles. So everything here is in the form of advice, and you should not just think of it as, well, I just have to follow these directions. It's more an overview of how to get going, but ultimately you have to bring your own values and personality to the enterprise. And of course, it offers my perspective on starting businesses. I've started a number of businesses and even started a software trade association. I should point out that in the US and Europe, rules vary at the local level, and you need to investigate the rules that apply in your locality. The United States has 50 states, and most businesses are registered at the state level, so the specific rules that apply to you really vary quite a bit from state to state. So again, there's no way for me to go through 50 states and the different rules. Europe also is a similar situation. There is the European Union, but even within the Union, businesses tend to be registered in a particular country and subject to particular laws. The European Union has some general principles that they encourage countries to adhere to, but there's still a lot of variation. So again, I can only talk in general principles, and you must investigate the rules that apply in your locality. So, since the time of Aristotle, one piece of advice when tackling a problem has been to focus on 6 questions, and these are commonly referred to as the 5 W's and an H. And for more information, here's an article talking about the history of these 5 W's and an H, and we've included this article as an appendix in the course guidebook. The 5 W's are the questions why, what, who, when, and where, and the H question is how. And now we're going to briefly talk about these questions and then go into a lot more details, maybe on the how question, where you actually focus on how you get started. The questions can be asked in any order, but we think that the above order is particularly useful when thinking about starting an enterprise. And the questions tend to spill over into one another, so it's not a logically clean process. I mean, the why question affects the what question affects why and who and when. And so you'll see that the idea is you use these questions to galvanize your thinking, and you keep refining your process. This is not a static process. It's not that you have an answer and that answer holds for all time. The expectation is that you will have to revise these questions regularly, even once your enterprise is underway, because in the day-to-day operation of an enterprise, it's easy to sort of get overwhelmed by the details and forget that the grand vision of why you started the business in the first place and what you're trying to achieve, because you get focused into very specific things. Oh, this employee is sick, or this happened, how do I respond? But it's always very important to not lose sight of the grand organizing questions. And now we're going to tackle these questions in the order proposed above. Why? This simple question asks the potential entrepreneur why they're interested in starting an enterprise. There's a potential for using up lots of time and incurring possibly great potential financial risk. So you really need to be sure, why are you starting an enterprise? And here are some reasons. Well, one is you might passionately believe that some product or service is necessary for the world, and that you want to be the person to deliver it. Okay. You may just have a very mundane goal of just making a lot of money. Maybe you retired and you want something to keep you busy in a meaningful way, or you're looking for a hobby. Or maybe you started doing something as a hobby, and now you think it has some great economic potential because people are asking for it, and there seems to be a market. So there could be a variety of reasons. Another one is maybe you can't find a job to your liking, and you need to support yourself. And so this might be a way for you to do that. Okay. Another reason that often crops up is that people are tired of working for other people, and they want to be their own boss. So the answer you give to this question will have a lot of impact on the answers. It will also determine how much effort you're willing to put in. If you're just looking for a little extra income or something to do, you will be looking at a low-risk, low-intensity business. It doesn't make sense at that point to mortgage your house or get into a lot of debt to operate this business. On the other hand, if you want to change the world, you'll be probably looking at a high-intensity, capital-intensive, high-risk enterprise. A business like FedEx was born from Federal Express, the delivery company, was born actually from a dissertation. But it's clear that if you're going to have that kind of a business, it has to be national in scale, and you can't just do it part-time on the weekends. So you have to go in and build a big infrastructure, have lots of employees, and you know, that's going to determine how you approach the whole thing. And if you're starting an enterprise because you can't get a job that you want, you'll have to move quickly and probably base the enterprise on experience you already have accumulated. What? Another important question you have to answer is, what exactly will you be selling? It's surprising how many entrepreneurs start an enterprise without a clear answer to this question. What are you selling? Are you selling, are you selling a service? Are you selling a product? Are you selling a game? Are you selling some compound? Are you selling some food item? What is it that you're selling? Important really distinction is between services and products. And the other thing that comes up at this point is that if you want to change the world in some way that will benefit the environment, starting an enterprise might not be the best way to achieve your goal. Because it may be that working for a big existing concern, a government agency or an NGO, non-governmental agency, might be the best way for you to proceed. I've included an article from Wikipedia on non-governmental organizations for more information. You could even start your own NGO if you feel that no existing NGO accomplishes what you want to accomplish. One big difference between an enterprise and an NGO is that NGOs are often charitable organizations and can ask for donations. If you're a company and you approach people for donations, you're unlikely to get them. NGOs operate somewhat by a different set of rules, but not entirely. We're not going to talk about them more in this presentation, but if it turns out that you want to start an NGO, you'll still find many parts of this presentation helpful to you because you still have to answer a lot of the same questions. Where's your money going to come from, etc. How many employees? What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Now, the NGO route is often a good one if your customers directly have no money, or if your customer might be the government. It might be easier for you to get grants for certain kinds of activities. And there are many fine NGOs that work all over the world and deal with all sorts of problems. So that certainly could be a way to go. As we've said, you have to decide whether you'll be selling a service or product. Each sort of choice has its own financial and liability concerns. Next question is who? And there's several questions that you need to know. For example, who are your customers? If you're going to have an enterprise, you need to have a revenue stream. It has to come from somebody. Who are the people who will supply the revenue? Your customers. Now here, you have to ask, do your customers have money? Are they going to feel that your product is worth whatever it's going to cost to deliver? These are all tricky questions, and we're going to return to the subject of how you can get answers to those questions. Who do you need in your enterprise? Besides you, do you need some employees? How many? What will their function be? Will these people be co-owners or employees? If employees, how will they get paid? Oftentimes, enterprises begin only with co-owners because nobody draws a salary, and this can go on for several years. Who will supply you with legal financial services? Sometimes startups don't have money to pay for legal and financial services, but they offer a share of the company to the law firm. Not all law firms or accounting firms are willing to go with such an arrangement, but occasionally some are. Who will supply your business with any services or raw materials you might need? One, of course, is when do you plan to start your enterprise? If you're thinking an activity that you will carry out when you retire, there might not be great urgency in starting the enterprise. On the other hand, if you plan to be in a very competitive market or might be looking to replace a job, you might need to get started sooner rather than later. If you have little time for your preparations because you're on a tight deadline, then your preparations must be done with great care, because mistakes in the early plan can be much costlier later on. And remember, it's much easier to change a plan before you start implementing it, so be sure to allocate enough time for planning. Where? That's an important question, and there's several where questions. One question is, where will the business be registered? In the U.S., registration is on a state basis, and the 50 states have different laws. And here are some references that rate the different states based on different criteria, and this can help you make a choice. Now, where to register is not always easy because, and similarly, in the EU, different countries have different laws and requirements for businesses, so that it can affect your choice of startups. According to Matthew McCreary, in an article called The Top 10 European Countries to Start a Business, he rates the top country to start a business, Ireland, Iceland, followed by Iceland, and you can see the rest of the list: Sweden, Denmark, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, United Kingdom, Romania, and Norway. Now, of course, what's interesting is because of the uncertainty with Brexit, it's not clear what the economic ties between the EU and the UK will remain. It's also not clear how this will affect economies in either the UK or EU. And in particular, Ireland is also kind of an area needs watching in the context of Brexit. So watch this space. A lot of the things that are now reasonable may change in the near future. It's hard for me certainly to predict what's going to happen with Brexit. Now, bear in mind that you can register a business in one place, yet have customers and perform work in another place. And how this is all done requires knowing the laws, both in the place where you're registered and the place where you're working. And for these questions, your best bet really is to get the help of professional lawyers and accountants to help you, because a mistake here can be very costly. How? Well, the how question addresses the steps you will take to get started. In Europe, company registration of any sort of major sort requires some starting capital, typically at least 10,000 euros. There may be some places where less is required, but that's a sum that I've seen pop up in many places. In any event, you need to investigate the details for your locality, but that just gives you a rough idea. In some states, you can register an LLC for $50. So again, other states are more expensive, so these details are very local to various states. There are several types of business structure you can consider. Simplest is a sole proprietorship. You're in business, you own it, everything comes to you. So the business is a kind of a part of you, not a real clear separation between you and the business. After that, there are a variety of LLCs, limited liability companies, or LTDs, which just stands for limited companies. And again, the details differ on which state or which country you're in. And these limited liability sorts of entities limit your exposure to risk. Okay, if you're a sole proprietorship and you run into some kind of difficulty, especially if it involves serious injury to people and there's a large judgment against you, they can not only take the assets of your business, but they can take your personal assets as well. They can seize your home, your car, whatever, savings accounts that you set aside, things like that. A limited liability company, your liability is limited to the investment in your company. If done properly and you separate the company from yourself, if the company experiences a calamity, you can limit the damage to yourself. That's why I highly recommend you investigate a limited liability sort of company. Above that is a corporation of some type, and the exact details, again, differ from country to country or state to state. And corporations have limited liability, but they also have many more regulations. In some cases, they have to pay separate taxes in addition to whatever taxes the owners pay. And they need to be organized more formally. You have to have things like annual meetings, reports, maybe even a board of directors. So my advice, I think, for most entrepreneurs is to start with a limited liability sort of company, and then, if necessary, you can evolve into a corporate structure. Okay, so as I've said before, answering these 5 W's and an H requires, it's an iterative process. That means as you answer one question, it might affect answers to the other questions. In general, you need to sort of go through these questions until you have some answers that you feel relatively good about, and then begin to move. If you don't have even a clue as to what some of the answers are going to be, like, for example, you don't really know why you're starting a business or even what you're trying to do, then don't start the business until you at least have tentative questions. Now, these questions should not be carved in stone. I mean, your answers to these questions should not be carved in stone, and you should be ready to revise your answers as you get more experience and get further into the enterprise, into creating the enterprise. Now, there's several types of businesses, and as I said, I think you want to limit your personal liability as much as possible. Now, one problem that comes up that sometimes people are surprised as a problem is choosing a name. Now, obviously, a name has to be relevant in some way. Ideally, it tells something about your company, although that's not necessary. The huge international corporation Exxon has a name where the name doesn't mean anything. In fact, they picked it because it was distinctive, and they are large enough to to make that work. Now, a small company, if you pick a really obscure name, might not help you, especially if people can't spell it or can't look it up because you've got some unusual spelling. So you have to think about it. But there are 2 additional factors that may come into play. One is that when you go to register your name, you find that somebody already has registered it. Now, then you have to make a modification of it, and this might get complicated if you plan to be in the same general business as the entity that registered the name, okay, because there are typically laws against having 2 companies having names that are confusingly similar, but still being different companies. And typically, the law sides with the person who registered first. So this is a complication that you may have to work through. The second thing is, which seems pretty obvious to most businesses, is that you want to have some kind of internet presence for at least most businesses. And ideally, you would like an internet domain that matches your business name. So if you're the XYZ company, you might want to get xyz.com. By the way, xyz.com has long ago been taken, so that's not going to work. But internet domain names are subject of intense speculation, and many very good names are only available at greater expense. If you get a name that nobody's claimed, it's usually not that expensive to register. It's, say, under $20 or so. But if you have to buy it, you might spend many thousands of dollars. In some cases, domain names have sold for millions of dollars. So anyway, this could be a concern, and some people rename their companies just because they're able to get an internet domain name. So these are issues that you're going to have to work through in your particular enterprise. Unless you have a lot of legal and accounting experience, it's probably worthwhile for you to team up with some legal and accounting experts. Many cities and countries have services that help you. Sometimes you can get some free help during the startup phase. Lots of cities, states in the U.S. have economic development programs to assist startups. They have incubators. U.S. government provides business advice. The EU has set up one-stop shop for startups. So everybody is in favor of startups. Political entities see them as things that might produce more tax revenue. So they are now trying to encourage the creation of startups. So there are many materials for you to study. Here are some useful links. So the first link is the one-stop shop for European startups. The second link points you to various places where you might find financing. There are all kinds of special programs, things like Erasmus, the new entrepreneurs that try to team up startups with existing companies. The U.S. has similar programs. There's a guide from the U.S. Small Business Administration, and also more information on startup options, and an interesting article from Entrepreneur magazine. Regardless whether you're in Europe or the U.S. or some other location, looking at all these various resources, I think, is helpful, just to give you an idea of possibilities and the types of questions that you can ask your local economic development people. Money. This is an important topic that needs to be addressed. Like it or not, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to have to deal with money. You're going to have to deal with generating enough money to support yourself and your projects. Many people are conflicted about money, and so this is a new perspective for non-entrepreneurs. If you've been working for a large organization and you get a regular paycheck, well, in most cases you don't worry about where it came from. It just appears in your bank account, or you get a check mailed to you or whatever, and that's as far as it goes. In an enterprise, money is really the blood of the enterprise. If you run out of money, it's just like losing all your blood. You're not going to continue functioning very much longer. People are conflicted, don't like talking about it or thinking about it, but you really need to pay attention to it. There's a famous quote called "Just follow the money." There's a movie called All the President's Men about the Watergate scandal. And the informant is meeting in secret with a reporter and feeding information about the project. And they start talking a little bit about money, at which point the informant says, "Just follow the money." And that turns out to be the clue to breaking the Watergate scandal, is following the money. Well, not quite in the same sense. I think this is good advice for entrepreneurs. Follow the money. understand where your money in your business is coming from, understand where it's going from. Not that you need to track every dollar. You can have accounting people do that. But you need to have a general sense of whether your enterprise is healthy, whether the cash flow is keeping you alive and keeping your enterprise alive, and you have to follow it. You have to see where it starts and where it ends, and ultimately how much of it ends up in your pocket, which is also important. Some people think of money as dirty, grubby, and especially if you come from the world of open source and academia, where you're used to giving everything away, and now you're suddenly charging for things that you think should be given away. But I think that you might find it useful to think of money as a vote. What do I mean by that? Well, oftentimes if you ask people, do you like something? Oh, they say, oh, sure, it was great. I loved your performance, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, they do it out of being polite. However, if you ask people, well, would you pay $10 to see me give this talk, or $20 or something? That's a different kind of question. And not so much that you're interested in the money, but if someone says, yeah, you know, that talk was so great, here's $10. I enjoyed the talk, you would see that that's a really strong vote of confidence. That really means they enjoyed it. So think of money as a vote. And if they're willing to spend money on your service or your product, that means they really support your product, not just trying to be polite, but they actually are interested. So, as I said, you need to have a fundamental sense of how the money is flowing in your organization. Another important talent is to develop a sense of reasonable estimation. When you make plans, you need to be realistic about how much things are going to cost. And many entrepreneurs are completely unrealistic about costs and dangers to their enterprises. And so they don't adequately prepare for setbacks and severely underestimate how long it will take them to be profitable. I've seen lots of plans put together by people that predict a profit in their first year of operation. This is not realistic for most startups. Does it ever happen? Sure, it happens. If you have a treasure hunting business and you find a pirate ship filled with gold the first month of operation, you'll show a profit. But much more typical is that it will take several years for you to actually develop your first profit. Take Amazon. Amazon, now perhaps the most valuable company in the world, took 6 years to generate its first profit. Bezos, the founder of Amazon, had to have enough financing to keep this operation going for 6 years before he was able to generate his first profit. Now, once Amazon became profitable, it became very profitable very quickly, but don't just assume that you're going to be making a profit in your first year. Suppose you want to hire a computer scientist. Okay, some people say, well, I'm going to hire 3 people or 4 people. Well, you have to think a little bit of what it's going to cost. Right now, a starting salary, you know, a good student out of a college with a computer science degree might start at $70,000 a year plus benefits. And the benefits include things like retirement and health insurance. Now, in Europe, health insurance might be less of a factor because it's universal, but anyway, you still have to make the calculation for your locality. What does it cost to hire a computer programmer? I'm just using this number as an example. So it might cost about $100,000 a year. It's what's known as burden cost. It's the cost together with all the taxes, all the insurance costs, all the health benefits, retirement, whatever. So it might cost you $100,000 a year. And so a 2-person company should have plans for spending at least $300,000 per year. And a 3-person company should plan for something like $450,000 per year. I mean, this includes salaries, if you have offices, telephones, heating, cooling, transportations, going to conferences, buying liability insurance, paying for benefits. So it typically is a lot more expensive than people assume. They think, well, I'm just going to have my friends and 5 of us are going to be this company, and that's okay if all 5 are willing to work for free. But if some of them need salaries, the costs mount up very quickly, and that's why there's a danger. You could raise this money. Oftentimes people do things like mortgage their houses and whatnot, but you realize then if the company fails, you've just incurred this debt, which could be with you for a while. So oftentimes that's why entrepreneurs start out by paying themselves very little, but most people cannot sustain long efforts with little or no pay. So it's good to have a little bit of realism in your plan and understand how much it's going to cost you, and especially if you have to put full time into your enterprise. Another thing that's important from a money perspective for people to understand is that there's a difference between company money and personal money, and that these are really different creatures. Number one is if you have a limited liability company, you have to treat it as a separate entity. You can't just freely interchange personal money and company money, because that can lead to you actually losing the corporate shield, because people say, hey, that's not really a company, that's just you, and you're masquerading behind that company. And so you need to be careful. If you set up a limited liability company or corporation, you have to keep a barrier between your personal finances and the finances of your company. But company dollars also have a different value from personal dollars because of tax considerations. In the U.S., if you have something as a business expense, you can often deduct it from your taxes, which means you pay for it with pre-tax dollars. If it's not a business expense, you pay for it with post-tax dollars. So, for example, if you go to a restaurant and have a private meal, you pay for that meal with after-tax dollars. If you go to the same restaurant and have a business meal, maybe with a potential client, whatever, you can usually pay for part or all of the meal with pre-tax dollars. And details differ depending on where you're registered and the exact nature of the meal. The other thing that's important is, so from one perspective, purchases made for business use are not as expensive as purchases made privately, even though the price is the same, because company purchases can often lead to tax deductions. Again, you should get advice on these when you set up your system, but you need to understand how money in your enterprise can have a major impact on the success or failure of your enterprise. Okay, here's some general advice. When you go to set up your company in an enterprise, you will often have to work online or through the mail by actually sending in forms. Make sure to make and keep copies of every document you work with, and make sure that you can organize your documents so you can find them. I mean, businesses have failed because of bad record keeping and the inability to produce things like receipts and agreements and contracts. If you're working online, make sure you download copies of everything when it's offered, and if it's not offered, just print the screens and save them. Do not assume that someone else will store copies of what you have produced. Mostly they will, but sometimes they only store them for 30 days or 60 days, so if you go looking for it a year later, it's been erased. When you make purchases, save receipts. Okay, that's an important thing. If possible, annotate your receipts. Like, for example, if you're having a dinner with someone, write down who, on the back of your receipt, write down who you had dinner with and what the business purpose of the dinner was and all that. In other words, just saying that I had a business luncheon with someone, it might not be enough to justify the deduction in case you're audited by the tax authorities, so you need to have that kind of information. And oftentimes, audits and things like that happen several years after the event, so it's very difficult for you to remember who you had dinner with 2 years ago on some night and what you talked about. So please write it down. And so annotate your receipts at the time of purchase and answer questions. And make electronic copies of everything. If you don't have a scanner, get a good scanner and scan things. There are various packages, programs, apps that will allow you to take photos of your receipts and leave documents. So find something that works for you, okay? And remember, it's better to have too many copies than none at all, okay? So it's okay if you have several places where you keep them. Just make sure there's at least one of those places that you can easily find. Now, once again, I'm just going to go through the types of entities. There's sole proprietorship. In many cases, you just hang up a sign and go to work. The pros are it's simple and direct. The cons, the big con, the big negative factor is no liability protection. You can have corporations. In the U.S., we have S Corps and C Corps. S Corps are small, and C Corps are large. And for a long time, the S Corp was the only thing that an entrepreneur could create to get liability protection. That's the big attraction of corporation. But the cons are it's relatively expensive to set up. Corporations have requirements for record keeping. You have to more complicated to run. When you make decisions, you need to document the decisions and why you made the decision, all that sort of stuff. And in the U.S., many states have separate corporate taxes unless you are an S Corp, in which case the revenue passes directly to the shareholders. Limited liability companies, relatively simple. They give you liability protection and minimize the paperwork. There are still some expenses associated. Some states require annual reports that have to be filled out, but compared to the work you need to do with corporations, this is a much easier way. At least in the U.S., there are at least 3 types of limited LLCs. One is just the standard LLC, which is probably the easiest. They have a new thing called a serial LLC, and this is an LLC which owns other LLCs. This is a new concept and somewhat untested. So again, I recommend this for people who are more experienced. But the idea might be that if you're starting some kind of real estate company that's going to own multiple properties, you can set up an LLC for each property, and each property is then owned by the master company. The advantage of doing that is that it limits the liability incurred by each property to what's invested in that property. So the idea is, let's say if you own 3 apartment houses, and each apartment house is an LLC, and let's say there's a fire in one of the houses and you're sued by people, they can't take the assets, they can't seize your other apartment houses if there's a judgment against that LLC. You're just limited to what's in that LLC. And then finally, the foreign LLC. This is a registration for an LLC that's based in another location, another state or country, but which wishes to conduct business elsewhere, and so it needs to register as a foreign LLC. So again, lots of complexity, best worked out with experienced people, legal people, financial people. They can be one person or multiple person. We've already covered. Now notice, because of liability protection, when you're a startup, banks and other institutions will ask you to co-sign loans as an individual. Okay, that means that if your LLC fails, they can sue you to recover the funds. Now, when you're a startup, you might not have a choice. You might have to sign these things, but still, it kind of limits your liabilities in certain ways, and only in the ways that you've signed on to, like a loan. If say your LLC gets into some legal trouble just because the fact that you co-signed a loan to a bank does not open your other assets up. But anyway, it's just something to consider. And usually the simplest thing is to make your LLC a member-managed LLC. That's a little technical, but when you look into it, it will make more sense. If you are planning to start out small, like a one-person operation, I strongly recommend you read The Incredible Secret Money Machine by Don Lancaster. Lancaster is a terrific writer, and he's very contrarian, has a different view on things, and even if you don't agree with him, the points he raises will make you think. Now, right now, you can buy the book from Amazon, but it's also available for free download as a PDF from Don Lancaster's website, which you see there. And this is what the cover of it looks like. It's very colorful, imaginative cover for a business book. But I recommend you read it. It's a great source of ideas. Now, there are two key documents for an LLC. First is called the Articles of Organization, which you create when you create the entity. Now, again, the details might differ very much in different countries. Maybe there's only one document, or it might be 10 documents, but the idea is there's some key documents associated with creating your company. So I'll use the example I'm most familiar with, which is the American example, is there's the Articles of Organization, which you usually get when you register the enterprise. And you typically need two more things in the U.S. You need to get a federal tax ID number, also known as an employer identification number, and you need an operating agreement. And both of these could be updated as your company evolves, especially the operating agreement. Typically, the Articles of Organization might remain unchanged, but the operating agreement, like, for example, if you get new partners, or the business changes in some radical way, or you change your location, well, if you change your location, you need to change the Articles of Organization and the operating agreement. But these are not necessarily static, and it's best to get some advice about the operating agreement. Oftentimes it depends on the locality. Sometimes you have to submit a company in the operating agreement to some government organization. Other times you just keep it with the company and only display it when asked. But again, you need to figure out those details. It's essential for opening up a bank account, and you can often start with a boilerplate document and then get advice. And as you grow and evolve, update your operating agreement. And the operating agreement includes like who owns how much of the company, what happens if someone dies or otherwise leaves the enterprise, what happens to the shares, et cetera, et cetera. So very important things. Federal tax ID is certainly required by banks or anybody to give you a bank account, and it's if you hire anybody, you need to have a federal tax ID. And in the U.S., you get this online for free from the IRS, and this you could get this in 15, 20 minutes or some very short period of time online. So in the U.S., you go there. You can also do it by mail or by phone, but it's much easier and faster to do it online, so I wouldn't bother with the other methods. There are many resources for startups available at little or no cost. As I've mentioned, there are many local economic development organizations, and you should connect with them and see what resources they have to offer. There's lots of information, many courses online that, again, in fact, the choice might be having too much stuff. There are lots of books, videos, and other courses, and you can take courses at colleges, universities, community colleges, private schools. So the rest of this presentation is dedicated to singling out some of the most useful resources. I certainly am not aware of all the resources. There may be others that are equally as good, but these are ones that are widely used and are considered pretty good. And since they are either free or at low cost, it's probably a good idea to at least glance at them. At the very beginning of this course, we suggested using the 5 W's and an H to help you organize your thinking about your enterprise. This should be a process that you continue. You should always be thinking about these questions, and we'll now introduce some valuable techniques that will help you answer these questions. Traditionally, entrepreneurs were told to create a business plan. Indeed, at some point you need to have a plan, but starting with a plan could be a bad idea because in the startup phase you don't know enough about the business to make a good plan. There's an author, Steve Blank, or I guess he's an entrepreneurial instructor and has been an entrepreneur himself, who has some interesting observations. And he has a book called The Startup Owner's Manual. And early in the book, he says, the pairing of venture capital and startup entrepreneurship emerged in its modern form, and the startup industry they fostered has been exploding ever since. Yet for the past 50 years, finding the successful formula for repeatable startup success has remained a black art. Founders have continually struggled with and adapted the big business tools, rules, and processes taught in business schools and suggested by their investors. Investors have been shocked when startups fail to execute the plan, never admitting to the entrepreneurs that no startup executes its business plan. Today, after half a century of practice, we know unequivocally that the traditional MBA curriculum for running large corporations like IBM, GM, and Boeing does not work in startups. In fact, it's toxic. It's a very strong statement, and it's supported by his next thing, and I look at the underlined version. It says, startups are not simply smaller versions of large companies. Large companies know who their customers are. They have a history with their products. They can make plans based on history. Startups have no history. Startups don't even know if they're going to have any customers or who their customers are. And so doing a startup really requires you to get out there and search for answers. Take the questions that I gave you and keep reworking them, okay? So startups are in search mode, whereas established companies are not. Steve Blank and other teachers of entrepreneurship are big believers in the business model canvas. Okay, the business model canvas idea was created by Alexander Osterwald, and I've included in the appendix an article from Wikipedia on the business model canvas. And Osterwalder and his colleagues have a website, strategizer.com, and it has lots and lots of materials and all sorts of stuff related to the business model canvas, and I recommend that you look at it. At this point, let's focus the Startup Owner's Manual. Sometimes you could get bits and pieces of it various places on the website, but as you can see, if you go to Amazon and get the Kindle edition, it's less than $8. So this is not a big investment, but it's a very handy reference book for starting up your company. Osterwalder, and of course this book, The Startup Owner's Manual, is by Steve Blank and Bob Dorff. Osterwalder is co-author on this value proposition design, and again, you can see the book is available for $7 on Amazon. And similarly, business model generation, also by the same two authors, available for $7, and they have lots and lots of material on their websites. Now, Steve Blank also offers a free course on creating a startup. You can take the course for free from Udacity, and Udacity has other free courses you might find valuable. Also, Steve Blank pushes this course on his own website, and he has all the materials, the PowerPoint slides, the video recordings. I think this course might take you several weeks to complete. Of course, it depends on the speed at which you're going. I think they're about, well, anyway, you can get the details on the course, but it definitely, I think, would be a useful thing for you to undertake before launching your startup. Another good resource is a book called Talking to Humans. And it has its own website, talkingtohumans.com. And the idea behind the traditional approach to creating businesses and the modern approach is all these authors who stress getting out and meeting prospective customers, partners, and talking about your ideas. You have to protect your idea so people can't steal it, but you can still talk in general to understand, get a better sense of the market, what kind of products people would buy or not buy. And so go to talkingtohumans.com. If you're a member of an educational institution, you might be able to get a free copy. But if you can't get a free copy, you can get a copy from Amazon, a Kindle version for $4. So again, not a huge expense, and certainly worth the reading before you get out there and start interviewing people. Now, Jeff Constable, who's the author of the book, has some interesting quotes from the Talking to Humans book. And the art of being a great entrepreneur is finding the right balance between vision and reality. You're probably opening this book because you want to put something new in the world. That's an incredibly powerful, meaningful endeavor. It's also scary and extremely risky. How can you get ahead of that risk and beat the odds? Again, he points out the fact that entrepreneurship could be risky and that these techniques are designed to help improve your odds of success. And he says, every new business idea is built upon a stack of assumptions. We agree with Steve Blank's insight that it is better to challenge your risky assumptions right at the start. You can't challenge anything sitting in a conference room. You have to get into the market, or as Blank likes to say, get out of the building. Okay, so that's the part that you have to do ahead of time. Now, we believe every entrepreneur needs to understand some basic accounting. You could get a little bit of knowledge from this article from Wikipedia, which we've included as an appendix. But there are free low-cost courses available from udemy.com. I think typically those courses they have some courses under $15. But there's also the International Association of Chartered Certified Accountants who have free courses that they offer. So again, you need some basic knowledge of accounting. I'm not saying you should do the accounting for your company, but you do need to understand the basics. Another important technique is prototyping. At some point, when you talk to people, you need to illustrate your idea. Some ideas people can imagine very simply, but other ideas need something more elaborate to show. And you can use models, which in this case we're calling prototypes, that can spot serious mistakes early and increase your chance of success. Again, there's an article on prototypes, which we've included for Wikipedia, but here are some tools for prototyping. One, a lot of people don't realize that Microsoft's PowerPoint program and similar programs like PowerPoint can be used for prototyping. So the first reference, Kinotopia Guides PPT, shows you how to make Microsoft into a prototyping tool, and it also includes a free course so you can understand this topic better. Similarly, here's another article below that also addresses using PowerPoint for prototyping. Another useful program is called Storyboarder, and you can find it at the Wonder Unit at that website. And if you want to construct very powerful and elaborate models, I recommend you consider using the Unreal game engine. This program can be used for free for private use and can be downloaded from the URL. This gives you a full-blown game engine that can create whole worlds and populate them with figures. And this website also has many free courses that will help you create astonishing visual models. So again, these are tools you might find important. Finally, presentation skills are going to be very important because you're going to have to be the person who sells your presentation. And it's important you polish up your presentation skills. Make slides that people can read. I'm always surprised when people get up there and have a presentation and they have tons of details in tiny fonts that nobody in the audience can read. That just leads to boredom on the part of your audience. Don't put too many details and tiny fonts on your slides. If you want to show people some detail, don't just put the whole sheet up there. You can put the whole sheet up there, but also make sure that you have a magnified section so people in the audience can actually see what you're talking about. Look professional and don't mumble. When you speak, try to speak clearly. Speak clearly and loudly enough so people can hear you without difficulty, and use language appropriate to your audience. In particular, avoid crude talk. And avoid topics and humor that can alienate your audience and cause them to lose focus on your message. Usually, commenting on political events and things like that may not work in your favor if the members of the audience have a different view. Also, I think you could learn a lot from looking at this YouTube video by Jason Tedick, who is a consultant who helps people improve their public speaking. And he also has lots of materials in this area. And there are, of course, lots of materials available on YouTube and other places. So coming back to the topic of entrepreneurial or environmental entrepreneurship, you can see that startups face the same challenges. Regardless of whether they're focused on environmental questions or not. So it's important for you to understand these challenges. At the same time, we want to encourage people to create startups that will further the work of the Heracles project. As you review the virtual courses 1 through 12, look for the promising ideas that can be commercialized. These might include new materials for cultural heritage restoration, new techniques for detecting deterioration in cultural heritage sites, and new protocols that could be used to protect cultural heritage sites. You are, of course, encouraged to have original ideas in this whole area or any other area, and especially if they can help protect cultural heritage sites. And I think the Heracles project would be very pleased to see that its efforts have inspired other efforts to protect our cultural heritage. So to summarize, creating an enterprise can be an extremely rewarding experience for you and for others. It can help you change the world, literally. It needs to be treated seriously. This is, especially if you want to change the world, this is going to take a lot of work and probably a lot of money. You can increase your chances of success by following the various methodologies presented in this virtual course. And there are many tremendous tools available at little or no cost. Please take advantage of them. We wish you great success in your endeavor, and thank you for your interest in this Heracles virtual course.